Good morning. My presentation and accompanying document analysis is on the announcement of the end of the Pacific War and VP Day, and why this event was such an important moment for Australia during the Pacific War. When Japan became involved in the Second World War in 1941, it sparked 4 years of perhaps the most brutal warfare Australia had ever seen. However, on August 15, 1945, Prime Minister Ben Chifley finally announced that the war was over. Ben Chifley went on to explain that Japan had agreed to the terms of surrender set by the Allied nations, and that hostilities would now cease. However, this was not entirely true. Toward the end of the war, Australia was fighting some of the most crucial battles in New Guinea and Borneo, and to continue to fight for months after the initial surrender. The cost of this war was incredibly steep for Australia, both financially and in terms of lives lost and minds irrevocably damaged, with over 39,655 lives lost and 30,000 taken prisoner. For Australia, this announcement could not have come sooner. The map behind me shows the area covered by the Pacific War and just how close it came to Australia. With conflict so close, it's easy to imagine just how terrified the people of Australia were, and why the declaration of the end of the war brought such relief to the people of Australia. The source I have chosen is an article from a newspaper published 2 days after the end of the war was announced, which contains both writings from the newspaper authors as well as excerpts from the speech made by Ben Chifley himself. The document is titled "The War is Over," published by the Cootamundra Herald on the 17th of August, 1945. This excerpt reads, "Had we posted upon the Cootamundra Herald office window that 7:45 a.m. flash, we would have emulated the Sydney newspaper whose notice board said, 'No peace yet,' at a stage of the last war when another message simultaneously said, 'The war is over.' The Sydney crowd tore down the information." This particular excerpt shows the thought process of the general public when the declaration was made. The authors explain that they were reluctant to publish the news when the message was first received for fear of giving the people hope, only to have it torn down again. This is the first part of the speech included in the article. The short sentence is perhaps the most impactful part of Prime Minister Chifley's entire speech, where he said the words every Australian had longed to hear for so long. "Fellow citizens, the war is over. The Japanese government has accepted the terms imposed by the Allied nations, and hostilities will now cease." He goes on to mention the sacrifice that so many men and women had made, and how, because of those people, Australians could now enjoy this glorious moment and enjoy the peace that they have won for us. It's hard to think of another moment that would have changed the lives of those involved in this war in such a powerful way. This excerpt reads, "And at one time it appeared that these invaders would reach the mainland of Australia and advance. But the tide turned, first slowly, then with ever-increasing speed and violence, as the mighty forces of the United States and the British Commonwealth and Empire and all their allies, and finally Russia, were brought to bear. Their resistance everywhere has now been broken. We rejoice that these territories will soon be purged of the Japanese invader." In this particular segment, Chifley speaks first of the initial fear felt as the Japanese forces edged closer, then with pride as he mentions how Australia and the Allied forces fought back and managed to win the war. The undertones throughout the whole speech echo this pride and the appreciation felt by Australians and their government during this trying time. In conclusion, the announcement of the end of the Pacific War was one of the most important and impactful events of the Pacific War for Australia. After being plagued by the war, and the fear of invasion for more than 4 years, this declaration finally gave people the relief they had been longing for so long. Finally, families were being reunited, mothers and children, wives and husbands, brothers and sisters. It meant that citizens no longer had to fear for the threat of invasion. It meant that they were free to live in peace again. All in all, Prime Minister Ben Chifley's announcement became a monumental moment in Australia's history, highlighting the impact that the Pacific War had on the nation and its citizens, and bringing the end to one of the darkest periods in Australia's history. Thank you.